Here's the gist. My overbearing sisters demanded to use my vacation home as a rental property for their own profit. When I refused, their husbands decided to break in. That just happened today, and now they're facing legal trouble. Let me set the stage. My parents decided to throw a barbecue, which I suppose is what people their age do to stay social. I initially declined the invitation because, frankly, I can't stand my sisters, their obnoxious husbands, or their unruly kids. My wife and I don't have children and prefer a quieter life. But then my mom, in true, relentless fashion, pressured my wife into coming. Long story short, we ended up going. By the time we arrived, the party was in full swing, with about 20 people scattered around. My sisters and their husbands were already deep into the booze, teetering between buzzed and full-on drunk. My mom, clearly in over her head, was busy wrangling the nieces and nephews, who ranged in age from 7 to 11 and were completely out of control. My dad, ever the opportunist, had escaped to the whirlpool section of the pool with a personal stash of beers. My wife and I made polite small talk with the random guests, grabbed some food, and treated ourselves to a frozen margarita. Predictably, my sisters and their husbands, let's call them Sarah and Jenna for the sisters and Brian and Kyle for their husbands, took turns nagging us for being late, not wearing swimsuits, and somehow ruining the vibe. Classic suburban summer nonsense. About 45 minutes in, two of the kids charged at one of the neighbor guests near the pool steps, shoving her toward the water. She stumbled but caught herself and only got partially wet. She was clearly annoyed but didn't make a scene, opting instead to grab a towel, dry off, and quietly leave. My sisters and their husbands, however, thought it was a laugh riot. Not long after, I was chatting with someone a few feet from the pool when I caught sight of three of the kids charging toward me at full speed. They clearly intended to push me in. Luckily, dodging children isn't rocket science. I sidestepped at the last second, and all three of them went flying into the pool. The guests, including my wife and me, burst out laughing, but the kids' drunken moms, Sarah and Jenna, went ballistic. Apparently, two of the kids didn't know how to swim despite wearing swimsuits. Since I wasn't in swimwear, I didn't jump in. Others quickly stepped in to pull the kids out, who were now screaming bloody murder like they'd been gravely injured. Chaos erupted. Sarah and Jenna, joined by their equally intoxicated husbands, started yelling at everyone, especially me, for almost letting their kids drown. To top it off, two of the kids had been filming their prank with their parents' iPhones, which were now at the bottom of the pool. Kyle, one of the brothers-in-law, attempted to retrieve the phones, but was too drunk and too heavy to manage it. Nobody else offered to help. Hardly surprising, given the parents' ongoing tirade against the crowd. I firmly told Sarah and Jenna it was their responsibility to watch their own kids, and that if anything had happened, it would have been on them, not me. Words flew on both sides, and my wife and I decided we'd had enough. We left right after Kyle tried to storm at us, but tripped and face-planted instead. Now, Sarah and Jenna are insisting I should have just let their brats push me into the pool to avoid all this drama, and ruin my phone in the process. As for my dad, he never budged from the whirlpool and probably didn't hear a word of the chaos. Narrator's commentary. I get that they're just kids, and they were trying to have fun, but the fact they thought this behavior was acceptable speaks volumes about their parents' lack of discipline. Honestly, I wish we hadn't gone at all. While it's nice to see my parents and their friendly neighbors, I genuinely dislike my sisters and their husbands. They've always been envious of my wife and me. My sisters are stay-at-home moms married to well-off husbands, one of whom earns more than I do. But my wife and I are both professionals, child-free, and far more responsible with our finances. That means we can afford a more comfortable lifestyle, take vacations, and avoid living in a chaos-filled house stuffed with kid-related clutter. Their envy fuels endless petty behavior, which makes spending time with them exhausting. Hopefully, this fiasco will convince my wife not to let my mom guilt her into attending another one of these gatherings. She's usually much more forgiving than I am, but based on what she said on the drive home, I think this might have been the last straw. Honestly, the only upside was seeing my dad's legendary ability to ignore the madness from the comfort of the whirlpool. My dad is one of those people who's completely unbothered by chaos. He's always been the laid-back type who thrives in social settings, likely a holdover from his years in sales. He loves being around people and wants everyone to have a good time. During the party, he and two of the other guys parked themselves by the whirlpool, beers in hand, and watched the whole disaster unfold like it was a reality show. My mom, on the other hand, is great but much more easily upset by things, especially when it involves the grandkids. For context, the kids were fine by the time we left. They were indoors watching TV, seemingly unfazed. To give you the rundown, there's 7, 9, 10, 10, and 11. The middle three were the ones who tried to push me into the pool, and if I had to guess, the 11-year-old, who's always the ringleader, was probably the one egging them on. Quick backstory about the party. I phrased the whole barbecue thing oddly in my earlier post because I had to cram it into the character limit. To clarify, my parents are social butterflies who love hosting gatherings. Their house is practically designed for entertaining, so they're always coming up with excuses to have people over. Originally, they wanted to host a 4th of July party, but one of my sister's families was on vacation at the time. So, this was a sort of belated Independence Day celebration, complete with flags, red, white, and blue decorations, barbecue, a margarita machine, and even sparklers for the kids. My nieces and nephews were the only kids there, since all the neighbors are around my parents' age. First off, my parents clarified something about the pool incident. Apparently, all the kids are decent swimmers and use the pool often. Even the 7-year-old, while still learning, loves the water. My sister only claimed they couldn't swim to make me look bad. For context, the part of the pool where the kids fell in is the deep end, which they're normally not allowed to go near. It was the 9-year-old and the two 10-year-olds who tried to push me into the pool. After my wife and I left, the party didn't exactly end on a high note. One of my brothers-in-law, let's call him Kyle, the one who face-planted during his drunken tirade, had to be taken to urgent care for stitches. My dad, who was stone-cold sober and not at all amused, had to drive him there since Kyle was too drunk to get behind the wheel. Later that night, one of my sisters decided to start a family group text, spewing nasty remarks about me. Her husband chimed in with a few insults of his own, as did the other couple. My wife and I wasted no time blocking all 4 of them. My mom called me the next day, clearly upset by what had been said in the chat. She and my dad were in the group text and understandably embarrassed by their behavior. The next day, my parents summoned my sisters and their husbands, sans kids, for a serious discussion. According to my mom, they wanted to lay down some ground rules. This intervention resulted in a grudging and half-hearted apology from my sisters, relayed through my mom's phone. I'm grateful my wife was with me during their call because her pointed glare kept me from saying exactly what I was thinking. I simply thanked them and told them there was nothing more to discuss. Thinking the drama was over, I unblocked them later that evening. Big mistake. One of the brothers-in-law, Brian, texted me asking when I'd be paying for the phones that had been ruined in the pool. He even quoted the price. WTF, right? I replied with a single word, never. Then I took a screenshot of his message and forwarded it to my parents with a note that we were officially done with this nonsense. I informed them that my wife and I were going no contact with my sisters and their spouses and wouldn't be attending any family events if they were invited. That's when things really hit the fan. My dad, who rarely gets angry, called my sisters and tore into them. Among other things, he told them their kids weren't welcome at his house anymore, which is a big deal since my mom often provides free babysitting. That news rattled them. He also banned them from using the vacation home and revealed a long-kept secret. My wife and I actually owned the property, not my parents. My sisters were blindsided. Both families have used the cabin extensively, even hosting their friends there for weekend getaways. My parents, normally very easygoing, had clearly reached their limit. For the record, I never wanted my sisters to know we owned the place. We bought it for my parents because they've always dreamed of a mountain retreat. Keeping the ownership under wraps was a way to avoid exactly this kind of drama. A few days later, my sisters and their husbands showed up at our house unannounced to apologize in person. We weren't home. We were out to dinner, so they left a note. One sister also tried calling me at work, but I sent her straight to voicemail. My wife and I have decided that staying no contact is the best course of action for the foreseeable future. It's been over 3 weeks now, and honestly, the peace has been life-changing. It's incredible how much more peaceful life has been since blocking them. I hadn't realized how much low-level drama they were constantly creating. They're not outright toxic people, but they're petty and exhausting, and I don't need that in my life. The vacation property was originally intended for my parents' use, and they'll continue to control who gets access until they're older. When the time comes, my wife and I now plan to sell it. If we ever want a mountain getaway, we'll just book an Airbnb. One silver lining in all of this is that we no longer have to entertain my sister's absurd fantasy of turning the property into a family compound. Apparently, she's been dreaming of building multiple houses on the land once my parents pass it down. That's not going to happen. As for their apologies, they weren't sincere. They don't regret what they did. They just regret the consequences. My wife and I are done with them, and honestly, they can go pound sand. The vacation home has always technically been mine as I cover all the expenses and bought it outright, but I gave my parents control over it because they've always wanted a family getaway spot. They're great people, and there's no way they could have afforded it themselves. I was able to buy it for them thanks to years of saving and investing wisely, plus a large bonus I received the same year I sold my home and moved in with my wife. While I don't mind if they let my siblings use it, I'll admit I take some satisfaction in watching my sister squirm now that they know I own it, and that I kept it a secret. Last week, my dad changed the lock code for the house, so now only he, my mom, my wife, and I have access. As for my mom babysitting the grandkids, she still visits each sister's house once a week, sometimes with my dad, to spend time with them individually. She says having them all together stresses her out, but separately, they're manageable. Once school started, she decided to pick each set up once a week, on separate days, and spend the evening with them at their homes. My parents have made it clear they don't plan to host my sisters or their families at their house for the foreseeable future, and they're enjoying the peace and quiet. I suspect they'd grown tired of the old dynamic and used the pool party disaster as an opportunity to set boundaries. Here's an interesting note. The moderators of the subreddit where I posted this removed my original story because they categorized the ruined phones as property damage, which apparently counts as violence. I still don't fully understand the logic, but it's laughable. The situation escalated even further over the past week. For this to make sense, let me give you some financial context. My parents have never been great with money. I've been handling their taxes for years, so I know the details of their finances. Their house is paid off. They have little debt, and they both get Social Security. My dad also has a decent pension, but their savings are modest. When they retired, I bought them a nice car as a gift since they've been leasing for decades. My sisters, however, have always believed our parents are sitting on a treasure trove of money and that they'll inherit everything because, in their minds, I don't need any of it. They've never felt the need to save or plan financially. Turns out my oldest sister and her husband are in serious financial trouble. They've maxed out their credit cards and are behind on their car leases. One is on the verge of repossession. My sister confessed all of this to my mom earlier this week, including the jaw-dropping revelation that for the past 3 years, she's been secretly renting out the vacation home and pocketing the cash. She charged $2,000 for a weekend or $4,000 for a week. Now that she's been cut off from the property, she's panicking because she had to cancel a rental booking and fears they're on the brink of financial ruin. To make things worse, my other sister knew about the rentals, but said nothing. I wouldn't be surprised if she did the same thing. I remember going up there once to drop off an ATV and finding a family staying there who said they were with my sister's family. At the time, I assumed she'd lent it to friends, but now I'm questioning everything. My parents are understandably upset. My dad feels betrayed and is mostly angry, while my mom is stressed out about the whole mess. Anticipating that my sisters would try to drag me into their financial drama, my parents gave me a heads up, and they were right. On Thursday, both sisters showed up at my house without their husbands and waited outside until I got home. I could either argue with them publicly or let them in, so I chose the latter. They spun me a sob story about why I needed to give them access to the vacation home again immediately. They even went so far as to accuse me of being a terrible brother and demanded I commit to paying for their kids' college tuition, because that's what family does. I let them say their piece and then called them out for everything my parents had told me. Things exploded from there, denials, crying, shouting, and insults flying in every direction. I won't lie. I said some harsh things, but nothing untrue. After about an hour of chaos, they finally left. I was so drained I took a shower and laid down. When I got up, my wife was home and told me she'd had to block more phone numbers because my sisters were calling us from new ones. Yesterday, my parents asked me to call them. I'm sure my sisters gave them their version of what happened, but I'm not ready to rehash everything yet. This whole situation has been utterly exhausting. Today, I drove up to the vacation house and padlocked the gate. I'm the only one with a key now, and I'm confident my siblings won't go to the effort of hiking 400 yards uphill to get to the house. This drama has left me mentally drained, but at least I can take some solace in knowing the property is secure. My parents used to keep track of who used the vacation home and handle all the routine maintenance, like replacing worn-out items. They've now decided they don't want to be involved in the drama anymore. While I completely understand their decision, it's disappointing. That place was supposed to be something they could enjoy and use regularly. I never minded that they let my sisters and their families use it. I always saw it as their call, even though I technically own it. Now that my parents won't be handling access, I'll have to be involved directly, which changes the dynamic entirely. To secure the property, I've taken several steps. The gate is now locked with a heavy-duty chain and a top-notch padlock. I reset all the door keypads and created new codes. I also had security cameras installed, including one with a high-resolution view of the valley that the installer recommended. The system cost more than I expected, but the peace of mind is worth it. Signs were put up around the property to make it clear the place is under video surveillance. I even installed a heavy-duty lockout for the water shut-off valve and drain, though I hope I never lose the key. It would be a nightmare to remove. Only my wife and I know about the water being locked off, and we're the only ones with the keys. Last week, both of my brothers-in-law called me at my office, trying to convince me to let them use the house again. The older one, Brian, was especially angry because he'd tried to go up there with friends for a guy's weekend and found himself locked out. He alternated between being pushy and playing the victim, even threatening to tear the gate out of the ground. He admitted they'd been renting out the property to friends for extra cash and accused me of ruining their business. He even suggested I should refund their guests' money. The audacity was unreal. I should have recorded the call, but I wouldn't know how to do that from my office phone anyway. The younger brother-in-law, Kyle, sounded like he was calling only because my sister made him. He didn't put up much of a fight when I told him they wouldn't be using the property again. I made it clear to both of them that this was final and they shouldn't ask me again. At this point, I'm seriously considering selling the vacation home. My wife and I don't use it enough to justify keeping it, and it's not like there will be any family gatherings there anytime soon. When I mentioned selling it to my parents, their reaction was indifferent. They said it was up to me. Financially, I'd more than double my money if I sold it now. The property consists of 3 lots with stunning views at the end of a private road. Still, selling it now would feel like an emotional decision, so I'm holding off for the time being. I haven't spoken to my sister since this whole mess started, nor do I have any plans to reach out. I don't know the current status of their relationship with my parents, and frankly, I don't want to know. On the bright side, my wife and I spent a lovely evening with my parents last week. We went to a new restaurant, and none of this drama came up. My mom did mention she's still visiting the nieces and nephews at their homes individually. Recently, I hired someone to manage and oversee the vacation home. He's a local guy who takes care of his parents and manages several properties in the area, some as vacation rentals and others as weekend homes like ours. He has access to the camera feeds and checks on the property physically every week or two. He seems to have an enviable life, driving around the mountains with his dog, inspecting properties, and lounging on decks when he feels like it. He also has access to a camera at the start of the private road, which captures snapshots of vehicles passing by. For $450 a month, plus hourly rates for basic maintenance and repairs, the peace of mind has been worth every penny. He's also well connected with the local sheriff's deputies, which adds another layer of security. My parents surprised me with how they've handled the latest holiday drama. My sisters have been pressuring them to get me to reopen the vacation home for Thanksgiving, which has been a family tradition, though my wife and I have only attended once in years. My dad didn't bother asking me because he knew I'd say no. Instead, my parents announced they'd organized the gathering themselves and suggested everyone split the cost of renting an Airbnb in the mountains. If that didn't work, they'd host Thanksgiving at their home, or one of my sisters could take over hosting duties. This plan caused a fight between my sisters. The younger one was on board with the Airbnb idea, but the older one couldn't afford to contribute and felt slighted. The deadline to book the Airbnb has passed, so it looks like Thanksgiving will be at my parents' house. My wife and I won't be attending, as we've made it clear we're keeping our distance. My parents have asked me not to sell the vacation home just yet. They'd still like to use it occasionally, though not until my sisters come to terms with the new boundaries. I know my parents hope that someday the family can come together again there, but I don't see that happening. For now, I'm content keeping the property secure and ensuring it remains off limits to the people who caused this mess. My wife and I have stayed firmly no contact with my sisters and their husbands, despite their relentless attempts to reach out. They've been calling from new numbers, thanks for nothing, Google Voice, and leaving messages demanding that I meet with them to work things out for our parents' sake, so everyone can use the vacation home again. They even called my wife, but we've both ignored their efforts. I honestly can't tell if they're delusional or think they can bully me into giving in. Either way, I'm not interested. According to my parents, the older sister and her husband are finally being forced to face the consequences of their reckless spending. They're giving up their SUV and oversized truck leases, as well as selling off their jet skis and other unnecessary luxury items. It's going to be especially hard on her. She's always loved to brag, and driving around in something older and cheaper won't sit well with her image. Her husband, whose entire personality seems to revolve around his truck, he even has a tattoo of the truck logo, is likely feeling the sting too. Frankly, these are just a few of the reasons I've never gotten along with him. Several people have suggested I turn the vacation home into an Airbnb, but I've decided against it for now. Sure, it would generate money, but it would also bring a heap of family drama and stress for my parents. They don't need that. Plus, it would be a logistical hassle. My parents' personal items would need to be removed, and there's no place to store them. The wear and tear on the property, along with the added time and effort required to manage it, makes it unappealing. Things took a much darker turn recently. On the Friday after Thanksgiving, both brothers-in-law broke into the vacation home. They used an angle grinder to cut through the chain on the driveway gate, damaging the gate in the process. They destroyed the lock on the front door and gouged it badly, then eventually broke in through a utility room door and a locked internal door. For reasons I still don't understand, they also broke into the barn. When they finally exited through the front door, they were met by sheriff's deputies, courtesy of David, the property manager. David had received notifications from the cameras about the activity and called the sheriff's department. The brothers-in-law tried to talk their way out of it, but the deputies weren't buying it. Breaking into an empty house in the area is taken very seriously. It's usually associated with meth addicts looting properties. When the brothers-in-law were arrested, they completely lost it, shouting threats about beating me up in front of the deputies. Not their smartest move. While this was happening, David and the sheriff's office tried contacting my wife and me to ask how we wanted to handle the situation. Unfortunately, we had left our phones in the car to enjoy a day with our parents in vacation mode. By the time we saw the missed calls and messages, it was too late. The brothers-in-law were already booked for breaking and entering, property damage, and communicating threats, all Class 1 misdemeanors. The fallout was immediate. My sisters, upon learning their husbands were in jail, called everyone they could think of, me, my wife, my parents, to demand the charges be dropped. Older sister, with no cash and maxed-out credit cards, couldn't even afford to bail out her husband. Middle sister likely had to cover bail for both men. On our drive home from the in-laws, my wife read the messages aloud to me. I could feel my good mood evaporating as the gravity of the situation sank in. Once home, I called David to get the full story and assess the damage. The details made me even angrier. Later that evening, I called the sheriff's department to confirm that there was no misunderstanding. I made it clear that I wanted to press charges and refused to drop them. The next day, I called my parents, who were understandably rattled. My mom was particularly upset, having been browbeaten by my sisters into pleading with me to drop the charges. I told her in no uncertain terms that I wouldn't consider it. Not until I spoke with an attorney and was fully reimbursed for all damages. By the end of the call, my mom was in tears, which of course made me feel like crap. My dad suggested it might be time for a fresh start for everyone, but he also agreed the brothers-in-law needed to take responsibility for their actions. I haven't been up to the property yet. I can't afford to take time off for non-emergencies, but I've seen photos of the damage. They're bad enough to make my blood boil. I've reached out to a couple of attorney friends for recommendations on how to proceed. I'm looking into restraining orders and considering suing my sisters and their husbands for the money they made renting out the property without permission. It's not about the cash. It's about making their lives as miserable as they've made mine. The gloves are off now. Some additional notes. The brothers-in-law had no idea I'd hired a property manager or installed cameras, and my parents hadn't told them, knowing it would only cause more drama. There are clear signs on the property indicating it's under surveillance, as well as no trespassing signs. My wife has reached her limit with all of this, and I don't blame her. She's been incredibly patient, but has now made it clear that she wants them all to face serious consequences. One potential consequence: middle brother-in-law, who holds a security clearance, might face repercussions at work. While older brother-in-law will likely walk away from this unscathed professionally, middle brother-in-law has a lot more to lose. I hope this motivates him to pay for the damages promptly. David, the property manager, continues to impress. It turns out he used to be a cop in a major city before being injured on duty. After recovering, he moved to the area to be closer to his parents and start a new life. His dog, a certified service animal, helps him manage his PTSD. David's background and connections with the local deputies explain why he's so effective. I'm grateful for his involvement. He's been a critical ally throughout this mess. As for me, I don't want to see or speak to any of them ever again. At the same time, I'm determined to make sure they learn a hard lesson. It's a conflicting mix of emotions, but I'm done tolerating their behavior. From here on out, they're on their own. At this point, many people have told me I should have taken a harder stance from the beginning. I avoided doing so because I didn't want to stress out my parents, and I hate this kind of drama. But let's face it, they're stressed now, and so am I. My wife has all but opted out of dealing with this mess. She doesn't want to hear about it for a while, and made it clear it's entirely in my hands now. She's been remarkably patient through all of this, but I can tell she's completely over it. As for why my brothers-in-law broke in, I can only speculate. My guess is they intended to use the vacation home for family trips or to rent it out again. According to David, the property manager, it's deer season until the end of the year, and in the past, they've used the property as a base camp for large hunting gatherings. The house sleeps quite a few people, so hosting even one event could bring in thousands of dollars. That might also explain why they broke into the barn, probably hoping to use the 6-seater mule I bought a few years back. I don't think they wanted to trash the place. It means too much to my dad, and they both like him a lot, even if they've shown zero respect for me. On Thursday afternoon, I received an envelope via courier at my office. Inside was a signed letter from both brothers-in-law and a cashier's check for $5,000. The letter was shockingly sincere. They admitted to breaking in, acknowledged it was wrong, and explained that the check was to cover the damages. They promised to pay more if the costs exceeded $5,000 and vowed to stay away from the property unless explicitly invited by my wife or me. They also asked me to do whatever I could to get the charges dropped, stating they were worried about losing their jobs. They even agreed to a restraining order or any other legal measure I thought necessary. The tone was completely conciliatory, a total 180 from their previous behavior. I was stunned. This was the last thing I expected from them. I had already scheduled a meeting with an attorney to discuss suing them for damages and seeking restraining orders. After receiving the letter, I called my attorney to update him, and he moved my appointment to later that day. He advised me not to deposit the check until we'd sorted everything out. During our 2-hour meeting, the attorney recommended drafting a settlement and mutual release agreement involving both my sisters and their husbands. He explained that while I would almost certainly win a lawsuit, it could take years, require significant upfront legal fees, and there was no guarantee I'd ever see any money. The agreement he proposed would essentially be a civil version of a restraining order. He also noted that I could keep the $5,000 regardless of whether I let them off the hook, but the settlement would likely resolve things faster and with less headache. After the meeting, I called David to get an updated estimate on the repair costs. By Friday, he had a figure, roughly $4,000, most of which would go toward fixing the damaged front door. That same day, my attorney contacted the brothers-in-law to inform them of the proposed agreement and advised them to get their own legal representation. Both of them quickly agreed. The middle brother-in-law admitted they could only afford to either pay for the damages or hire a lawyer, but not both. He said they didn't see the point of hiring a lawyer since they had no real defense for what they did. His primary concern was ensuring the charges could be dropped. My attorney also reached out to the district attorney's office on Friday to discuss the possibility of dismissing the charges. He left a message for the prosecutor, but hasn't spoken to them yet. He believes the charges might be dismissed, given the brothers-in-law are paying for the damages and have no prior criminal records. However, he warned me that I might need to drive up to the prosecutor's office early next week to confirm my stance in person. The attorney advised me to maintain strict no contact with my sisters and their husbands for at least the next 6 months. He stressed the importance of following the terms of the settlement agreement to the letter. I suspect the sudden change in their behavior stems from them realizing just how much they have to lose. The potential legal fees, fines, and the highly unlikely, but still possible, chance of jail time seem to have scared them straight. Middle brother-in-law, in particular, has a security clearance for his job that could be at risk, so I imagine he's desperate to put this behind him. This resolution isn't perfect, but it feels like a step toward getting out of this nightmare. I doubt I'll ever have a civil relationship with any of them again, and I'm perfectly okay with that. At this point, my primary goal is to move on with my life and never have to deal with them again. I'm completely drained, and my wife feels the same. Oddly enough, receiving their written apology was a significant moment for me. I didn't realize how much it mattered until I saw it in writing. The money itself doesn't feel particularly important right now, though I'll gladly take it. I'm fairly certain the middle sister and her husband were the ones who scraped together the funds. The cashier's check was issued by the credit union where he works. Once the agreement is signed, I'll likely provide one final update, probably just an edit to this post. Writing these updates has been a way to clear my head, and the feedback from others has been invaluable. I'm deeply grateful for everyone's support and insights. I truly hope none of you ever have to go through anything like this. The settlement process finally came to a head this week. On Tuesday morning, I met with my attorney to review the agreement. We made a couple of minor changes, and then he sent it to my sisters and their husband for their signatures. The agreement included a clause requiring them to pay my attorney's fees, which totaled about $3,000. Predictably, they weren't thrilled about that and tried to negotiate it out, but my attorney shut them down. He made it clear that their only options were to accept the terms as they were or face a lawsuit. If it came to that, he explained, we pursue everything, damages from renting out the property, the break-in, wear and tear, emotional distress, legal fees, lost income due to all the time wasted, and anything else we could throw at them. He also emphasized that I'd push hard for the DA to prosecute every single charge. In the end, they folded. They signed the agreement and provided an additional cashier's check for $2,500, claiming that was all they could manage. It's close enough to cover everything, so we're accepting it as the final payment. From what my attorney told me, the signing was tense. The middle brother-in-law took charge at one point, telling my sisters to shut up or he'd walk out and make a separate deal with us, leaving them to fend for themselves. Apparently, everyone kept things civil enough to get through the process, but it was clear there's no love lost between them. Yesterday, I drove up to the vacation house to inspect the damage and meet with the DA's office. Seeing the state of the house made my blood boil. The damage was so senseless and avoidable, and I was furious all over again. I tried to cool off by taking a walk, but it didn't help. Eventually, I called a good friend who listened to me rant for over an hour. He helped me refocus on the bigger picture, moving on from this mess and getting back to my life. While I'm still angry, I managed to calm down enough to eat something, which improved my mood a bit. Later, I met with the assistant DA handling the case. Since the brothers-in-law paid for the damages and I don't want to prosecute, they're dropping all charges except for trespassing. That charge, in this instance, will be reduced to a Class 2 misdemeanor. The brothers-in-law will have to plead guilty and pay whatever fine the judge sets. The DA made it clear that if they contest the charge or cause any future trouble in the area, things will escalate quickly and severely. Their cooperation during their arrest also played a role in reducing the charges. Had they resisted, nothing would have been dropped. I stopped by the sheriff's office to thank them for their quick response and everything they'd done. I wanted to thank the deputies personally, but only got to speak with the dispatcher. I also tried to meet up with David, the property manager, but couldn't get a hold of him. The settlement agreement includes a no-contact clause. If any of them show up where my wife or I are, or vice versa, whoever got there last must leave immediately. Any communication must go through attorneys or a mutually agreed-upon third party. They get to keep whatever money they made from renting out the property, which was my biggest concession. However, if any tax consequences arise from their activities, they'll be responsible for handling them. Both sides have released each other from any liability for events up to this point. My wife and I signed the agreement today. Once it's finalized, there won't be much I can discuss about the specifics, though I can still talk around it. This feels like the last step in closing this chapter. Writing these updates has been incredibly therapeutic for me, and the support and insights I've received from others have been invaluable. I'm genuinely grateful to everyone who's offered advice, encouragement, or even just a kind word. Looking back, I struggled not to be vindictive, but I think I made the right choice. If they stick to the agreement, I won't have to deal with them again, and that's good enough for me. If they stir up more trouble, I'll regret not going after them harder, but that's a bridge I'll cross if necessary. The family dynamics are, as you'd expect, completely wrecked. I've only told my parents that we were working things out without giving them any details. I'm sure my sisters have fed them a slanted version of events, but I can't be bothered to correct it. This agreement formalizes what's already been the reality for months. My parents might not like the way things have turned out, but I had to prioritize my wife and myself. I suspect my sister's entitlement has been brewing for years. Things started shifting when I bought a loft in my mid-20s, before either of them owned a home. They didn't like that I had achieved that milestone first. Their resentment deepened when I met my wife, who comes from a wealthy family, and they accused me of being elitist. Our wedding, while reasonable, was enough to spark envy and petty behavior from them and their husbands. The sale of my loft and our frugal lifestyle allowed me to buy the vacation home for my parents. We kept the ownership quiet because my sisters would have accused me of using my wife's money, which wasn't the case. Until recently, I thought we were okay as siblings, distant but not outright hostile. I now realize they've grown spoiled and entitled over the years, which wasn't my problem until they made it one. At this point, my hope is simple, that I never hear from them again.